Good afternoon and welcome to the Standing Committees meeting for Wednesday, January 17th, 2024. All council meetings will be live streamed on the city's website. Our first order of business is roll call. Will the clerk please take the roll?
Mr. Charlin.
Here.
Mr. Coghill.
Here.
Ms. Gross.
Here.
Mr. Lavelle.
Here.
Mr. Mosley.
Here.
Mrs. Cal-Smith. Ms. Warwick.
Here.
Mr. Wilson. Ms. Strasburger, Chair.
Here.
7 members present.
Thank you. Our next order of business is public comment. I would like to remind all speakers that the rules of council state that comments are limited to matters of concern, official action, or deliberation, which are or may be before city council. Profanity will not be permitted. Please state your name and your neighborhood for the record. You will have 3 minutes to speak. Our first registered speaker is Naomi Mullen. With Ms. Mullen absent or not here, we have next Chief Ikahana Halmakina.
Greetings and good day. My title is Chief Ikahana Halmakina. I'm the Grand Inca of the Iroquois Confederacy of Aborigine American People. I would like to reiterate and to reestablish and renew your commitment to the Universal Declaration of Rights of Human Rights, which is also in line with and in harmony with and in concert with the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. This historic declaration details how cities are to use these human rights tools and also goes as far as to encourage people like yourself and myself to familiarize ourselves with the vernacular contained within the articles of this declaration, to also promote, educate, and defend, and even enhance and share with others. Some of these acts include, and are not limited to, the recognition of the inherent dignity and equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family, and is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace throughout the world. And we are asking for you to honor this, to look at it, and to roll out these articles contained within this declaration. Whereas we the people shall revive, enhance, and ensure the prosperity and equity and liberty of the American indigenous people. Thank you for hearing my words, and may they resonate with your spirit and cause you to take action. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. There being no further registered speakers, we will now take comments from those in the audience wishing to speak. Are there any speakers wishing to come to the podium? Are there any speakers? There being no further speakers, we will now move on to our standing committee's agenda. And that takes us to Finance and Law Committee chaired by myself. Bill 8.
Councilperson Strasburger presents Bill number 8, resolution authorizing the mayor and the director of the Office of Management and Budget to apply for grant funding from the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development local share account statewide to provide funding for the purchase of vehicles for the Pittsburgh Park Rangers. The grant proposal includes an ask of $90,000 for this stated purpose.
Is there a motion to approve?
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Moves us to Bill 10.
Bill 10, resolution to authorize and direct the incurring of non-electoral debt through the issuance of a series of general obligation bonds of the City of Pittsburgh in the maximum aggregate principal amount of $62,495,000.
Motion to approve. Second.
Discussion? Discussion? Yes.
Thank you. I think we have people here to talk about the issuance. Can we have anyone here from the administration who, I'm not sure who, there's a lot of people in the audience. sure she's online. All right. I guess we might just ask whoever wants to give a brief overview to introduce themselves, and we'll wait. And if anyone else needs to speak, then we won't. Instead of going down the line, we'll just wait, and you can introduce yourself as your turn or your place to jump in. So I assume, Director Pollack, that you are going to take the lead in a discussion.
Sure, at least in introducing the topic. So
Thank
Jake
you.
Pollack, Deputy Mayor of the City of Pittsburgh and Director of the Office of Management and Budget. I am joined by the city's both internal financial staff as well as representatives of our municipal financial advisor, who together constitute the team that is assembling this package. I guess I will say, as a general introduction, that the action before you is the formal authorization to issue debt to support the already approved and adopted 2024 capital plan. So this action would authorize the city to take on bonds that support projects and initiatives that are included in the capital budget that was approved at the end of last year. Beyond that, I will turn the floor over, I think, first to Director Gula and then to our financial advisors to talk through any particulars they want to address. But fundamentally, this is a follow-on action to the approval of the capital budget that simply authorizes us to issue the bonds that are necessary to support that spending plan.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Director of Finance, Jen Gula, and with me are the members of our municipal advisory team. It's Kyle Laus and Matt Stuzinski. Both of them probably are familiar to you. They've been at the table with us before many times for this very occasion. As Director Pollack said, this is to fund our 2024 capital budget, of which we have already done a not to exceed amount in the operating budget, because the expenditure for the capital program and the debt comes from the operating budget. So beyond that, I'll leave it open to any questions, but just as a reminder, without this, we won't be able to enact the budget that you already passed for capital projects. So I'll leave it open to all of you who have, I'm sure, many questions. So.
Thank you. I think I'll still hold the floor. I'll just remind the public, though, that when we did our kind of budget hearings in the fall around the capital budget and the various departments, we didn't explicitly speak about the borrowing costs, the total debt load of the city. And so that's the kind of conversation I think that the public, seeing this on the agenda, would want to hear about. And, having been through voting on bonds several times, it's usually the discussion that we have, right? Where are we in terms of borrowing? How do we compare to other cities? Council members benefited from a briefing that wasn't televised last week, so we had some of these questions answered, so I know you have the answers to them, about kind of like what is our debt load, what is the health of our city in being able to, according to the rating agencies, in our ability to repay this kind of borrowing, what kind of return would we get? And just as a note, the last time we had a discussion about borrowing was last year, and the legislation that was approved by council was to transfer $2.5 million of payments annually to the URA for 25 years. And that bill read $62.5 million total. The issuance was only for 30, right? So the bond sold, and so we have it's because this is our own issuance, the legislation is written kind of conversely. Here, the legislation is written by how much we want to borrow, now what is the total cost? Last year's legislation was reading as what would the total cost be, right? Which was $62.5 million is what it would cost the public. That's not how much was borrowed. Only 30 million was actually borrowed. The city got 30 million in hand and will pay a total of 62.5 million to the URA. This is the opposite. What the legislative language in front of us is authorizing a bond to borrow this much money. And so we're going to ask our colleagues at the table to tell us how much it might cost us. Okay, so that's my question. How much will it cost us?
Yeah, let me just jump in. Good afternoon, Matt Stuzinski, MAS Financial Advisory Services. Pleasure seeing you all again. Let me start by saying thanks to City Council staff, administrative team for your engagement last week at the briefings. Thought it was a very robust exchange of question and comments regarding this topic. Kyle Laux to my right here from Davenport. Happy to go through the entire presentation again if we find that to be beneficial, but perhaps we can address specific comments first and then see if we can backfill with any additional presentation materials. As it relates to the debt issuance legislation before you today, the intention is to issue enough bonds to fund the exact amount of the projects that are identified in the 2024 capital improvement plan, which is $58,075,000. We'll not issue 1 penny more than that which is needed to fund the projects that are specifically identified and in that dollar amount of $58,075,000. The only addition to that would be the cost of issuance. For that is for bond counsel, the municipal advisor, the underwriting team, printing, rating agency fees. That's roughly $400,000, and that's all detailed in the presentation materials as well. And that is almost identical to the cost that has been incurred over the last 4 or 5 years. So the good news is that that cost has not changed much, but we're only intending to issue the exact amount. Now, in that instance where we were going to issue $58 million worth of projects or issue enough bonds to cover $58 million, we'd expect over 20 years. This is a bond issue for a 20-year period with level debt service, meaning it's going to look much like a mortgage payment, meaning principal and interest combined in each year for 20 years is going to be roughly the same or approximately the same. And we estimate that to be about $58 million in principal and about $32 million worth of interest expense over that 20-year period of time. Now that fluctuates based upon where the rates are today versus where they are in March, when, if all goes as scheduled, we'd be in the market with a fixed rate debt issuance. So that may swing, but what we all hear, at least coming out of the Federal Reserve and elsewhere in the economy, is that interest rates should likely continue on a path downward between now and the course of the year. So we'd expect that to $32 million to be close, but I cannot guarantee that number at today's interest, that'll be the case, but we don't expect it to move that much between now and March of this year.
I think that was more clear than I said it. So this issuance, we're expecting to actually get $58 million, right? And it will cost us an additional 32 in interest, right? So that's nearly a 2-to-1 ratio, as opposed to last year's bond where we were only receiving 30 million from the market, but it will cost us an additional 32 million and a half in interest, which is a 1-to-1 ratio. Director?
May I? Thank you, Councilperson Gross. A critical difference between the two issuances is the manner in which they have been issued, right? So in this instance, as has been the case in prior issuances by the city for general obligation debt, we are securing against the full faith and credit of the city the ability to repay, and even, as you will see from Mr. Stuzinski's presentation, that there's we're paying basically a one-third premium over the course of the life of the debt toward interest, right? So we were issuing 58 million, we're paying 32 million. We are leveling that out at that rate. The affordable housing bond that I believe you're referencing is issued at a slightly lower bond rating due to the nature of the credit of the issuing agency, as well as its dependence upon our revenue, its appropriation dependence on our issuance of the continued funding. And so as a result, yes, it is incurring a higher rate of interest. It is still over the term of the financing and over what are projected interest rates. a valuable proposition in that upfront investment in those particular expenditures. But we do anticipate, as we always do, with the city's general obligation debt to support defined capital program, a more favorable rate and a more favorable perception by the rating agencies and thus the buyers.
But again, for the public, this bill reads, so Bill 2024-0010 that we're discussing reads $62,495,000. That's actually not how much we're spending. We will be spending over 20 years, probably closer to $80 million or $90 million. Whereas last year's bill, what you read in the title of the bill was the total cost to the city. So it's just because of the different way that the bills are read. So I just wanted to make sure that we understood that point, that the $62.5 million that is in this bill is not actually the total cost to the taxpayer over 20 years. In addition, I think one of the things we usually touch on is, again, what is our ratings? How much of this is how much of the spending in the city is on debt? Because we have our own ordinances, I think that we're not to exceed 12% or something of our operating budget. And I know that was part of our briefing, so if anyone wants to kind of jump in again, just to kind of frame this, should we be doing this now? How does it affect us? And what do our listeners need to know?
Sure. Patrick Cornell, Chief Financial Officer. So the way you explained it is accurate, right? We are going to be paying this bond back if issued via the operating budget. So this is where the capital budget and the operating budget are fully connected. And we do have a metric that the debt service each year as an expenditure cannot be more than 12% of total expenditures. And where we are now with the council approved budget, including this issuance, because we've estimated that into the total expenses, would be 10.1%. And it would increase a little bit each year to 10.9%, 11.4% in 26, and then drop as we do have some series of debt that we will fully repay or pay down significantly in 2025 and 2026.
Are those housing bond payments of $2.5 million a year to the URA also included then?
In this factor,
Yeah.
no.
Oh, no.
No.
No, because they are not debt of the city. They are appropriations by the city to an outside entity that is issuing that debt. This factor contemplates debt that is in the name of and accrues to the city. Those housing bond expenditures that you're referring to, Councilperson, are in this instance appropriations to the URA, which is the holder of the debt.
But our rating right now is excellent, right? So we're talking about the rating of the city. And I think you were talking about the two different rating agencies, and I can't remember, Moody's and
We use Fitch and S&P.
Fitch and S&P. And how are we rated now?
AA- stable
And so
for both.
we're great, and we should get a good rate.
We should. Yet to be determined. We still have rating agency presentations to do.
That's their present rating. They would rate a future issuance again against the terms we present to them, which would include the terms of this issuance. So provided council's approval, we would go back to them to reevaluate, but we don't expect significant change.
Thank you. I'll pause there, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Councilman Coghill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the briefing the other day. It was very informative. I left the briefing, though, thinking to myself, and Councilwoman Gross covered some of this and helped me figure this out, I think, but I want a more definite kind of answer from you all, if I can get one. I know you helped on the URA bond. You saw that through, correct?
If I might, Councilman
Yes.
Coghill, we were on the calls representing the city, but we were not part of the transaction specifically. We're just protecting the city's interests, making sure that we saw documents, were party to conversations, and making sure that we were keeping an eye on the activity, particularly as it related to the conversations with the rating agencies.
Councilman, if I may speak to that briefly. MAS and Davenport did not represent the URA in that transaction. So they were not the financial advisor to the URA.
Who did represent us?
PNC Financial represented them. I know that via context. They're not here to speak for themselves, but I'm aware of that. The role that MAS Financial and Davenport played was as a consulting partner representing the city's interest there. The city's interest extended to the accurate representation of the payments pledged by the city in order to secure the financing. So Matt and Kyle can speak to the way in which they represented the interest of the city in ensuring that that ultimate issuance was conducted in a way that was protective of the city's ultimate financial interest and its bond rating. We don't have anyone here today that can speak to the full terms of that agreement. However, I've been on all of those conversations, and I do believe I can speak to it in a general manner. And I can say that that issuance occurred with a different character than this issuance. What was pledged to the bondholders and to the public in that case was the payments that council has authorized to the URA as revenue to the URA in order to satisfy the payments on an issuance. That comes at a different interest rate than the general obligation of the city. The city is not generally obligated to those bonds. And that speaks to a difference in repayment structure.
Okay, so my questions are this. You don't need to go through your involvement with that. We talked earlier, Matt. I was scratching my head after we left the meeting the other day. I'm thinking, why are we only paying 33% interest on the bond, the capital funding bond that we're here talking about today, versus 100% interest on the URA bond? And can you help explain to me the differences? Now, I understand, first of all, the credit rating, because of taxpayer dollars guaranteeing this loan, better credit, better percentage rate. And correct me if I'm wrong, let me go through it, the three things that we came to, which affects the interest rate. The number of years, this is 20 versus 25 years. And Councilwoman Gross mentioned it when I was, we were trying to get to the bottom of this, but this is a non-taxable. Right, ours is taxable. Where this is not.
No, ours is
No.
not.
Right.
Therein lies the rub.
Right, okay.
The
right.
difference between the largest, we'll call it factor in that equation, is the fact that you're issuing tax-exempt bonds
Right.
and the RA was taxable. There's a substantial
Millions
interest
of
rate
dollars.
differential.
Millions.
Right.
Right,
Substantial interest rate differential between those two. And from the investor perspective, they expect to get paid more for a taxable issuance than a tax-exempt.
Sure.
And I would
So-
add to that,
Go ahead.
if you'll permit me, Councilman, that the guarantee, in addition to it being a taxable issuance, which is an advisable position for the types of investments that we hope to make from the affordable housing bond, because they will be put into mixed finance, mixed income deals in which that is generally beneficial to ensuring their ultimate completion. That they are issued against a pledge of revenue from the city, which has a fixed amount. That $2.5 million a year authorized by council. Conversely, our tax-exempt bond issuance for our capital program is both tax-exempt, and by virtue of being tax-exempt, borrowers expect a lower rate of interest because they will recoup some of that cost in the exemption, and those are pledged against the full faith and credit of the city.
Right.
So rather than being pledged against an annual appropriation, they're pledged against our entire portfolio of assets. If we don't repay, we've never once been anywhere close, even during Act 47, to not repaying. So I don't mean to suggest to anyone that would ever even remotely enter our thinking. But in a world in which catastrophically that occurred, those subject to our entire holdings rather than a limited appropriation. And so the difference is there's a higher expectation in return for taxable bonds, but that leads to greater flexibility in ultimate spending. And there's a lower security offered in the URA's offering in that it's only secured against our annual payment. In this instance, what is before council today is a fully secured against the entire credit of the city and not just a particular
Understood.
dollar number, and a tax exempt bond. And both of those things provide greater surety of repayment to the borrower and thus require a lower interest rate to produce.
Understood. So the obvious question is this for me. We use the URA as the vehicle. Did we have to do that in order to spend that money on housing, or why?
Yes.
Why wouldn't the city just take out that bond and get $40 million for gross amount versus 30?
If I may.
Sure.
We needed to use them to actually spend the money because of fundamental differences under Pennsylvania law around how these investments can be made. Municipalities have very particular requirements around how funds can be expended. Redevelopment authorities have also very particular, but much more attuned to this use case, requirements around how they can expend funds. We cannot, as a municipality, we cannot transact in land on anything other than an open competitive basis, for example. We cannot make investments into mixed investment projects.
So we could not have taken that loan out and spent the money for its intended purposes that we are using for the URA. Is that right?
No, we could not.
So-
The Pennsylvania law is constructed in such a way that only a redevelopment authority, and in our case, the Urban Redevelopment Authority of Pittsburgh, in our jurisdiction, can expend the funds for their intended purpose. If we could, under a different construction of Pennsylvania law, we would have, but that is not the case in our current context. And so we proceeded along the lines in which we did because the intended expenditures fall within the jurisdiction of a redevelopment authority.
Okay. I guess I understand that, So the money that we're spending from the URA bond, we couldn't have taken that bond out as a city because we wouldn't have been able to spend that money in the intended purposes, which we don't know yet. I don't know yet, anyway, as to how we're going to spend that money. But we know it's going to be on housing, affordable housing.
The URA has stated previously at this table that the intended purposes are to capitalize existing programs that focus on housing affordability. I believe the bond was closed on
December
what date?
28th.
The 28th of December. So that started under a previous ordinance, a 90-day clock to produce a report to council on the intended expenditure that will be provided on time. I can tell you as a preview to that report that it will mostly articulate what was articulated to council prior to its authorization, which is that those funds will be moved through existing URA programs that focus on the production and stabilization of existing affordable housing. Their report will, as called for in law, will articulate that in more concrete fashion, but it remains the intention of the administration and the URA that those funds will be deployed through existing means, but increasing them in such a way that they can achieve greater effect. So we don't intend to create new programs. We intend to fund existing programs in an accelerated way that will have a major impact. To the extent that a new program is created, it would be as a offshoot of an existing one that identifies a gap in its standards and procedures.
Okay, had we decided to forego the bond and take $30 million of ARPA money, there's no restrictions on that. We could have used that towards affordable housing, like we intend to use the loan for the URA, correct?
Yes, but we could not have possibly spent that in a single year.
Well, 2 years, really. I mean, because anything under contract at the end of 2026 is considered.
We could not have possibly put $30 million under contract in a single year or in 2 years that could be satisfied that quickly.
Okay, but I remember the conversation on this loan, this 30 million, that we were going to spend that within a 3-year period. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so how is it that we could spend 30 million in 3 years, but if we took 30 million in ARPA, we couldn't spend it in 2 years? I mean, it's not going to be, we're not talking until at least March, April, May, sometime this summer before we can draw on this current money for this bond. But what I'm saying is, if the aggressive spending that I was told for the URA loan, and I'm sorry, gentlemen, I know we're not here to talk about this particular bond, and I know you weren't the consultants on it, but if we were going to have a timeline of spending that in 3 years, why is it impossible to spend $30 million of our own money in 2 years?
It extends the definition of under contract, right? Like we can certainly place the entire proceeds of this bond under contract under a period of time that aligns to, excuse me, your expectation. The manner in which we would do that through these mechanisms would be to pair those investments with private market investments to ensure the completion of more complicated projects.
Okay, the bottom line for me, I'm sorry, Deputy Mayor, is, I feel like we're taking out $30 million in interest on this bond, when I feel like we could have fronted that through ARPA money versus going $30 million, not $62 million in debt, $30 million just in interest alone. So that's all hearsay now. I understand it's in the URA's hands. So, that's, I'm not going to quibble with you over that. That's, I understand it. I don't understand. That's why I voted against it. I felt like it was kind of a bad loan that we were taking. So back to you fellas. I know you assisted in looking over the URA bond. You weren't hired by us, so you didn't charge us any fees for that.
Correct. That's correct.
Okay. But your advice to us was, you were asked for your advice.
Director Pollack, is it okay?
They were asked to provide their advice to the city on whether the issuance was adverse to the city's interest, right? So yes, they were asked to provide guidance, but ultimately their guidance was keyed towards the city's ultimate bond rating, not to the rating of the bond.
Understood. Care to comment on the actual bond since you're familiar with it? Was it something you would recommend for a client?
So the only thing I would add is that I think it met the city's objectives of trying to fund the housing projects that were identified. And I think they entered the market at a reasonable time. They did wait for a period of time. The rating to the URA was not adverse to the city, and we actually have confirmation from Standard & Poor's who affirmed the city's rating in the process. So I'm here to say I think it was a successful sale. and
Understood.
I
I understand. I don't mean to put you in a bad position. Okay, but I know this current rate for the new bond, capital improvement bond, is 3.87%.
So
as it stands today.
That was a preliminary estimate
Yes.
of where the interest rates were as of last week.
So when we finally pass this, probably next Tuesday, how quickly do you engage and lock that rate in?
So if I might, Director Pollack, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
So the process lays out a schedule that has us coming before council as a first step, of course, which is part 2 of your council step of approving the capital plan last December. Then we proceed with preparing a prospectus document, which takes about 30 days. Okay. In the meantime, we are coordinating conference calls with the rating agencies, which should occur mid-February. And after that is complete, it takes about 7 to 10 days for that to come back to us. We're likely then looking to market the bonds through an underwriting firm. A mid-March, wherein we would fix the interest rates.
Okay.
The good news is that we don't have to stick to that schedule. We keep an eye on the markets. We can, there is some flexibility
If
in
it
that
goes to
schedule.
4.2%, we can wait it for another
We can
month,
hit the
and
pause
hopefully-
button.
Yeah, gotcha.
Right, and we can wait.
Understood.
If I may summarize some of what Matt has said, that the advisory support that we've received from MAS Financial and Davenport is that we've structured the URA's issuance in a way that we do not anticipate that issuance having a bearing on our ultimate rate projection. So correctly, Councilman, you have asked, do we have some flexibility in monitoring the market and determining exactly when to issue? We do. We do not believe that your prior line of questioning around the URA's issuance will have a weighting effect on what we find when we go to the market with those potential offerings.
Okay, most of my questions really evolved around the last bond that we took out, okay? I feel that this is the type of rate that we should get for a bond. So I'll be supportive of it. We have to fund our capital projects. We don't have $62 or $58 million laying around, I guess. So we're going to need to do it in order to advance.
Do you
our
have some in your
project.
district?
I doubt it, but I will be checking. So some, I hope, but no. So anyway, my whole point was, why do you get us such a good rate there? And being that you're tax exempt with the city, probably the extra 5 years contributed to that.
Most certainly.
Okay.
And the difference in the rating.
And the difference in the rating, right.
And the taxability.
But
Right.
the difference in the rating really comes down to it's guaranteed money from the city of Pittsburgh. It's taxpayer money.
That is correct.
Okay. Well, thank you. I appreciate you answering all your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kale Smith, followed by Councilman Mosley.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a few questions. I missed the briefing, which I called for to hear a little bit about it, because we usually don't have 9 members wanting to sit in on a briefing. So our clerk's office scheduled what we normally use, but there was some confusion with how many people were in the meeting at the time. So I offered to take time to talk to my colleagues and our budget director, which I haven't had a chance to do. But I do have some brief questions that people have mentioned. But you mentioned the housing objectives that the city identified. Do you know what they are? Could you list them?
I'll defer to
No, could you
Director
list them?
Paul.
Could you list what you based your answers on?
The city funding $30 million worth of the affordable housing plan that the URA has currently in place.
Okay.
So we weren't scrutinizing of that, other than to point out that it met what was previously described as the city's plan.
Okay. And when a council member asks you a question, we expect you to answer it. So if we wanted to ask the director, we would ask the director. If we're asking you, we want to ask you. So just, I can easily say to the director the same thing. And I just want to know, can we pay this back, Director Gula, with the new assumptions about the tax refunds and to lower the tax revenues? Does this debt issuance account for the new variables that we were talked about the other day too?
So this debt issuance was actually, it's in the current budget. And I don't know if you compared last year's budget to this year, but last year we actually budgeted for $159 million in real estate collections. We actually lowered that for 2024 to 150. So we had been forward thinking some enough to lower the projections for our collections. How much more that'll be impacted, we're still playing out, but we will be able to repay the debt. So just to also let you know, it's not something that we would necessarily do, but the debt is taken out on the city's full faith and credit. And basically, we have the ability to raise taxes if we so need to. So, not that we will.
Council has
but you
the authority
have,
to
right,
raise taxes.
You
You do not have the
I
authority
do
to
not,
raise
but
taxes.
you do.
So to be clear.
So there is, not that you would do that or agree to
Yeah,
it.
I
but,
would not.
Right,
Okay.
but it's there, so.
Yeah. And I will say I will not, because I think there's a lot of places we need to stop handing, grant money out and other things before we start considering putting more of a burden on the taxpayers of the city. So that's why I would not.
We
But
do, well, we have things to help mitigate, actually,
Okay.
any further
I
impacts that we
actually think
could.
that you can. I think we've had some discussions about it, before, about what we can do differently. And if the $2.5 million per year to the URA were accounted for as debt, would we have exceeded the 12% in the fund reserve?
I don't know, because I haven't actually even looked at that. It was never considered to be debt of the city. We have it listed as an expenditure, so
Well,
we
just
weren't.
because you have it listed doesn't mean it is, but
It's not. So it's accounted for in the budget, but it's not in an amortization schedule, and it's not part of the city's obligation. It's separate. So we did not,
and how much are we paying now?
in debt or for the URA? In debt service? So this year our annual debt service is 69.3 million.
I'm gonna let you follow up. I'll let you follow up, Councilwoman.
10 point.
I'm-
It has to
The
be.
debt service.
So currently, the debt ratio, it would be 10%. I think Chief Cornell
working
said
on it.
it's a 10% of the overall expenditures. So
10 point something.
10.6,
Hold on one second.
he's calculating.
It's love Excel. It would marginally increase it from 10.1% to 10.4.
So that's the answer to
So-
the question
so-
that you
okay.
asked.
So it would
Okay.
not. So the overall, based on the debt policy, the overall
Right.
percentage is 12%, so
12%,
we would still
right.
be below.
Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Mosley.
Thanks everyone for your time for being here. I guess my question is best for Matt and Kyle. I understand that in the event that this is passed legislatively, there's some wiggle room and time to monitor the interest rates and figure out the best time. So my question is about timelines. Hypothetically, if there's a delay in us passing the legislation, is there a time horizon in quarter one or early quarter two where if it doesn't pass in this body that it then really negatively impacts the ability to actually move this through the process which you've laid out?
Director Pollock, Jen, Director Gula, is it okay if I answer?
Yeah.
So we generally build room within the schedule to allow for disruption, whether or not it's the delay by councilmanic action, delay by a rating, scheduling a rating, delay by just the ability to put together the prospectus document, or by disruption in the marketplace. We measure those delays, any of those delays, against the proposed need for cash by way of the capital improvement plan as council has approved, and by way of David Hutchinson's team that measures when these contracts have to be put in place and the construction season starts. So we're measuring that against those needs and trying to build a bridge between those two missions. We can always, and the city has indeed hit the pause button because of market disruption, whether or not it's been COVID or something else in the marketplace. The city has endeavored to hit the pause button, wait till it's more, there's a calm environment, stable environment, and then go to market. So we do have measures in place to allow for that. We do keep an eye on the city's need to fund and enter into contracts for construction season 2024. But we know that we would guide, if we can build a bridge to delay, if we can delay and then build a bridge to, we'll call it, fulfill the mission, we will do so.
So, having allowed Matt to answer that question, Councilman, if you'll permit me, we always endeavor to issue these bonds within the conceivable timeline at the most favorable position to the city. What we seek to achieve there is the best rate while also contemplating the projects that must move forward. So I believe what you've heard from Matt is that as we communicate to them, both our ultimate proceed requirements as well as our immediate needs, they seek to calibrate when they advise us to issue around securing enough funding to achieve the objectives that we've identified. We can always forego issuance to a point that it produces a more favorable market, but only so long as it produces the ultimate required amount that will fund our overall capital plan. So if your question is, can we calibrate the ultimate proceeds to achieve a joint objective of minimal expenditure and maximum product? Yes, we can do that within a particular window, a particular tolerance ratio.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further discussion? Second round, Councilman Coghill.
Thank you. I just forgot to ask one very important question. One very important question was, we know this is locked in at, or if we were to take it out today, 3.87%. What is the URA's percentage rate? I mean, we know how much we're getting, so we got to know the percentage rate, right?
Well, their rate on a revenue-based issuance is different than their overall rate. We could probably tell you what their, I think we know the rating on their issuance, but I'm not, no one here directly advises the URA on their bond issuance, so I'm not sure we can answer that question for you.
You gentlemen?
I don't have that committed to memory. I apologize for that.
Yeah. But we have confirmed that we're getting so many millions of dollars for the $62.5 million. It's 31.1 or something like that million, right? So how do we not have a interest rate on it? If we know that's the sum that we're getting, I mean, we could probably figure it out. I don't know.
If you're asking for what their interest rate is on
Right.
the housing issuance, we can answer that.
That's what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So I just pulled it up, dug through my emails. 5.627%.
5.62 compared to 3.87.
Some of them are 5.718%.
5.7 to 5.2.
But that
It's
Ju-
double, pretty much. Interest rate.
that is different than the rating, which was perhaps where we were misunderstanding your question. There is certainly a difference between the market's rating of that issuance on a revenue basis with the city's general obligation issuance around its
I'm just
capital
looking for a number, as to the percentage rate that we're paying on the $62.5 million. That is anywhere between 5.2 and 5.7%, Patrick, right?
Yes.
That's it. That's all I need to know. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Second round. Any further discussion? Councilwoman Gross.
I was just say, the one other question that we usually ask that hasn't been asked, I don't think, at the table so far is, and I see the charts, I know that you have, so I've been looking at this chart that you have in front of you, which is the chart that shows kind of like where the debt cliff would have been, and then if we do this issuance, like in yellow, you can see that there isn't as much of a drop-off in interest and principal payments as there might have been, and so I'm going to let the panel answer that question too.
Sure.
And I'm happy with permission to jump in. So to your question, your current debt service in terms of the city is about $69 million like we talked about. And the next debt cliff that comes up is in 2027. At that point, that debt service goes from about 69 to about 33 or there about $1 million. So it literally is cut almost in half. And so when this issuance is done, the annual payment on it is about $5 million a year, a little bit less. And so that $32 million goes to about plus or minus $37 million. And so it's still substantially below where you are right now at about $69 million. So even with this issuance, when you get to that debt cliff in 2027, the city's annual debt service will be substantially below where it is even right now.
Thank you. And I think I also heard in the answers about timing that there's nothing that would really actually happen before March or so, and that the issuance might not actually be, I think either you said it today or in the briefing, that it could very well be like summer, second quarter at least, close to third quarter.
So, one thing I want to say, and then I have an interesting point there. With the issuance itself, there's a provision in the resolution that does allow the city to borrow against itself, so that Public Works, DOMI, PLI, our using operating departments can start a certain portion of their projects as soon as council passes this resolution. And
So it buys you more time. There's language in this resolution that basically buys you more time.
To start spending down the proceeds, and that's Treasury regulation. It's anticipation of when this resolution is passed, it has started the clock to do the issuance. If that makes sense.
There's an amount actually in the resolution of amounts that we would then reimburse ourselves from the bond issuance for monies that they would have to put up ahead of time to secure contracts or projects.
Maybe what I had in my mind is like, it's basically like, sure, there are some capital projects ongoing, there's plannings that happening and engineering, but it's not construction season yet. And so and then we also talked in the briefing how specific line items, because that's the other thing about the tax exempt bonds, is that they're specific line itemed projects. That are actually multi-year projects, right? Maybe 3 years ago they were started with PAYGO, or they were started with CDBG for planning or something like that, and that, the bond portion that's being asked for now, and the capital budget we just voted on and that we're about to do borrowing for, isn't necessarily like originating a brand new project nor completing one under this one issuance. Just kind of point of clarification.
Right.
Yes.
And so, but for me, that means that this is like, it's not like we're not holding projects hostage. If some members have talked about, like, if we just want to like chew on this for 2 weeks, like the sky's not really falling.
So
You're making a face that the camera can't see, because I can tell, because I could see that the camera was on me and not you. Do you want to expound?
Sure. So I
Yes.
will say that department directors, like I said, Public Works, Mobility and Infrastructure, have identified things that are ongoing that they could start spending down. But there is a mix of projects that are approved to be funded with 2024 bonds. Some of it is planning, some of it is design, but some of it is ready to move into construction. And it could be the sorts of construction that doesn't have to wait until midsummer to start.
Okay.
I'm just going to add to that, if you don't mind. So some of these projects actually do get matching funds. And so, speaking from experience, in order to get those matching funds, we actually have to prove that the money has been deposited into the bank.
Can you tell me specifically which ones?
Usually they're highway, I'm going to say they're highway grants, but
And
also
lot of our federal highway
I didn't
administration
bring my
grants.
spreadsheet from last week with me. So is it in my packet? I don't like to speak in hypotheticals.
Those ones are not called out in your
Like
packet.
in
but
general, that's a true statement, what you said, but is it exactly true for those line items? I don't know.
Projects that are moving from Federal Highway Administration through PennDOT, a lot of those, most of them have city match that we have to put.
Penn Avenue Phase 2.
There you go.
That's in the spreadsheet that I'm not looking at, but I remember from last week.
That is correct.
And
Penn Avenue Reconstruction Phase 2, the things that are on the tip through the SPC.
Okay. And are you telling me specifically that one could
Is in
start
this
like
list. Oh.
Wednesday if we did final vote on this Tuesday, and that somehow if we don't do final vote Tuesday,
That I do.
Penn Avenue Phase 2 is a big
I
disaster?
cannot answer that
I don't think so, because it's actually been 20 years in coming since I've lived through it, so I doubt it. But point taken. Hypothetically, we might be delaying a matching amount for something that hypothetically could be starting in January or February, that hypothetically would be delayed 2 weeks?
Yes.
Hypothetically, yes. Okay, that's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Is there a will to hold 2 weeks? I mean, I've heard members say it. Again, I didn't hear an answer that the sky would fall if members need some time to worry about their concerns about revenue or the uses of the bond, so. But if there's no will, there's no will. I'm not really reading faces very well here. I see one no. I
you
see
know,
one.
if I
see
may-
one hard
I've been
no.
hearing questions about a 2-week hold. Is there a motion or is there no motion and we move
That's
to
what I'm
approve?
trying to ascertain, Madam Chair.
For discussion, second round, Councilwoman Kale Swift.
So
followed by
I actually
Councilman
had a lot
Wilson.
of questions, and that's why I called for the briefing, but I actually went back and talked to our budget director, and I feel a little bit more comfortable. I'm just going to abstain today till I finish getting the rest of my questions answered, but if you want to hold, I'm happy to hold too. Either one. I'm happy to vote, I'm happy to hold. It's up to you guys.
Councilman Wilson.
No,
I'd like
you're
not
the
to
only one.
hold. I mean, unless I hear some reason yet. I haven't heard a reason. I've heard questions and answers, but not sure. I just haven't heard any reasons why we would hold.
Third round, Councilman Coghill.
No, I would just say to Councilman Wilson's, the only reason I'm hesitant to hold is for the simple fact of the reassessments going on downtown, okay? I know that Councilwoman Gross has a message out to the county executive. We want to know what we're looking at, right? How many buildings, how much real estate tax are we looking at in decline? I think you did a good job on this. The rate and the return on the money, I feel was, I don't think we could ask for more than that. But I would entertain holding if others would. So just for a week, though, if anything.
Motion to hold 2 weeks.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
3 noes. Aye, I'll say aye. Motion passes. Held for 1 week.
1 week.
1 week.
Motion
You
was to
did
hold
make
2
a
weeks.
motion for 2 weeks.
I'm
You
sorry.
did.
I thought
Motion
it
was to hold for 2 weeks.
Well,
Apologies.
It was a motion to hold for 2 weeks, but I would prefer just 1 week myself, if you would.
Motion to hold for
entertain
2
changing
weeks
it.
is approved.
How do we do that? Is that what do we do?
Motion
Rescind
to
it?
reconsider.
Rescind? Is it rescind, Madam Clerk?
Motion to reconsider.
I'm sorry.
Motion to
But nobody
reconsider.
listened to me.
Motion to reconsider,
Second?
and then you have to vote on that.
Motion to reconsider.
We did it in second, so you have to vote it. You have to call for a
All
vote.
those in favor?
Aye.
Welcome to my world.
Opposed? Okay, motion to reconsider is
Motion to
approved.
hold 1 week.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
No.
Opposed? No. 2 noes. Motion passes. Bill is held for 1 week.
1 week.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Thank you for the fulsome discussion. Thank you for our invited guests for answering our questions. That moves us on to Bill 16, sponsored by Councilman Charlin.
Bill 16, resolution authorizing and directing the Pittsburgh City Controller to perform an audit of code violations that escalate to magisterial district court from point of origin to resolution pursuant to the powers outlined in the Home Rule Charter.
Motion to approve?
Second?
I guess this is where I say brief discussion.
Brief discussion. Councilman Charlin.
So I just want to thank council members for their indulgence here. This is something that anyone who's talked to me for a little bit knows I'm very passionate about. In the city, we have a lot of mechanisms that are created to encourage voluntary compliance for our weeds and trash issues, and property issues as well. Thank you. But ultimately, I've spent, and my office, Joyce and Alicia, have spent countless hours in court, and we have found that the system is severely lacking. It's not encouraging voluntary compliance, It's easy to work around, and it also is a major drain on the taxpayers. The amount of man hours that are spent for cases that don't exist are staggering, and we've worked with the controller and asked our new controller here if she would conduct an audit to just find out how wasteful this process is, and this hopes to be the first step in what we will look towards in maybe defining a new system here. So thank you all, and I want to thank the controller. I'm looking forward to what comes out of this audit here.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kale Smith.
Thank you. I want to thank you, Councilman Charlin, for introducing this. I'd like to be added as a co-sponsor, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I will say that it is something that has been, since I've been here, has been so frustrating. And I think when I talk to people like Councilman, or like our city solicitor, or city council solicitor, who used to do a lot of the code work in other places, I gained so much insight of what we could be doing differently. And so I really would like to see us do things that are actually yielding results for the residents. But this is a very great beginning of doing that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councilman Coghill.
Yes. Permit interrogatory with Councilman Charlin, please?
Interrogatory.
Okay, interrogatory. First of all, I'd like to be out of the co-sponsor. I like where you're headed with this. But I'm just asking you this. So we're auditing, so violations from magistrates to have people, orders for them to clean, whether it's their yard or stop putting their garbage cans out. And we're going to look at the overall picture as to what the violations are. And is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, so I'm not planning on looking at, well, and ultimately this rests in the hands of the controller here. But what I'm not looking to look at is the violations. I'm not looking to look at what we enforce. I'm looking to look at how we enforce.
Got it.
So, my plan would not be for us to, create new violations, but in the current system where we have to view a violation 3 different times and then go in front of the magistrate, which might be, in some cases 4 months later, and someone, can just walk in and say, I'm sorry, Your Honor, I can't figure out how to work one stop, and the case is dismissed, which is something that, I've seen hundreds of times. That process needs to be modified.
I know you spend a lot of time in front of District Magistrate King.
Yeah.
He tells me every time you're there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I know you're, very, and I agree with you. That's great. So it's not really the fines that we're giving out. It's like, how are we enforcing them? Are we enforcing them? Are they following the law by, abiding by what the judge says? Got it. Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Oh,
Aye.
Councilman Mosley.
Yeah. Councilman Shaw, I just had a quick question. It came up actually in the in the briefing that we had about littering. Do you I guess kind of 2-part question. First, do you have a sense of kind of the worst actors, the percentage of kind of landlord versus owner-occupied, property owners, and what was the percentage of that, and and will this, analysis, kind of break that down so we get a sense of what is the percentage of kind of owner-occupied property owners versus landlords that contribute more or less, to this overall problem that you're trying to tackle?
Yeah, so there's 2 parts there. The first thing you mentioned was the worst actors. And I think that's something that we focus maybe a little bit too much on, or who are the worst actors, because those are the people, the Persads that get the attention, and maybe the media writes a story on them, and they rise to the attention of the mayor's office. What I'm actually more concerned about is the bulk of the offenders. So, when I go to court, for example, the last time that Judge Riccardi had court, we had 40 cases in front of the judge, and now one of those was one of the worst offenders, but 39 of the other ones that were there are the cases I'm concerned about here. And at that point, all but 6 were dismissed. So I'm concerned about the bulk of the cases and not just the worst offenders. Now, as for the breakdown of owner occupancy versus commercial properties or landlords, I don't have an answer for that. That is actually something we put into the audit to have requested there. I'm not sure if that's something that we'll be able to find, but it is something that I'm there are bad renters, there are bad landlords, there are bad owner occupied properties as well. So I'm not sure what the breakdown is of that. I think that we do ourselves a major disservice by villainizing all of the landlords and all of the renters in the city, as the city has become more than 50% renter. But at the same time, I'm not sure, and it'll be interesting to see kind of where the breakdown is, among violators of our code here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilwoman Warwick.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, can you all hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thanks. So I was just a little curious, and I mean, maybe we don't know this answer yet until the controller dives in, but I know that you have had discussions about this. So in terms of the scope, because we did have an interesting briefing yesterday from Chris Mitchell about kind of plans to streamline, litter and trash management, right, at the city, which all sounded very good. I mean, it seems like we need the people power to actually make it happen. But so what I'm curious about, sort of in your thought process and your discussions with the controller, are we going to be looking at, because, as you said, cases get dismissed. Now, are these issues that you want to be looking at our city processes, like we're not providing the evidence necessary or whatnot to pursue these cases, or are we going to be looking at issues with the way that the courts handle the cases, or even like state law, like how we're inhibited as a city to actually deal with these problems, because once it goes out of our hands, it's with the court, or sort of all of the above? I don't know if you can answer all of that now, or if that's something that's going to come out through the audit. By the way, I'm supportive of this. I just was curious.
Yeah, great question. So we, and I don't want to speak for the controller here, and I feel that I'm kind of verging on the line of doing that, but we don't have the ability to audit things that aren't ours. So we won't be able to do an audit of the magistrates. We won't be able to, do an audit of their processes. But we can do an audit of the homework that we do that leads to the case. And that's what I want to look at here is, are we doing the work, the correct work to make sure that we're sending the information to the magistrate that they need to actually, make sure that the right person receives the notice of violation. Those kind of problems that are all our issues. So we won't be auditing the state law. We won't be auditing magisterial court, other than if there's something in there that says that this is what they are. We might be, restating what exists from there, but ultimately we can't do an audit of the magistrates.
Yeah, I mean, it might also be just for because we do have our colleagues at the state, at the county, et cetera. I understand we can't do a deep audit of the processes, but somewhat of at least a review as part of this of the law and how it works between, so that with potential recommendations for things that our colleagues could do, whether that be a county council or state or whatever, or county exec, to help us streamline this process and make it more efficient and effective.
Thank you. I like that idea.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Councilwoman Gross.
Thank you. I am glad to support an audit of our processes. This is something that I've worked with on similar matters when we called on the city controller to audit the LERTA programs when there really wasn't an annual review of kind of who got tax breaks and who didn't and where are they. At least now we have that list and we can kind of move beyond, okay, so now we have a list. What's the social impact and how do we evaluate the upsides and downsides of this city program? So similarly, I think it's important to get kind of more information about how things are happening. But, and so I'm happy to support today. But as a member said, like once we get the information, are we going to be able to get our questions answered? And what comes to mind for me is how we very often are trying to kind of hold a mirror to ourselves and asking ourselves where in our systems are maybe unfairness structured, right? So where kind of do we have intersectional data by race, by gender, so that we can examine the impacts of our policies, maybe even unintended impacts, but impacts nonetheless, right? Councilman Lavelle worked to change our policy around marijuana and citations. I can't remember exactly how it turned out. I think Councilman Lavelle and Councilman Burgess worked on traffic stop violations so that we were making sure that there wasn't structural, racism in our own systems in the city. And so I'll just say that when I've tried to look at PLI data, what we were not able to see because it's different than policing data, was there wasn't data captured on gender and race. And so we asked the questions, but we weren't able to get the answers. So I think that's an important set of questions here, because we don't want to be blind to any systemic racism or sexism and injustice in our own PLI citations, right? So just like we kind of, talked about the, traffic stop violations, I think it really comes to mind as a good example of like, hey, sure, safety is important, but if this is not being implemented in a way that creates more justice but creates less justice, that's not okay. And how do we fix it? And so in my own district, PLI citations are weaponized against vulnerable homeowners, right? So PLI violations are aggressively used to drive people out of their homes by the speculators that want to drive those people out of those homes. And we know that's true. I don't know that this will be able to see that here. We also know that PLI citations are kind of the places where when people are trying to stay in their homes, that we've created programs around the lead ordinance, providing funding for people to come up to compliance, so that there's kind of an equity in the, eradicating that source of, negative health impact, in even sidewalk grass cutting, right, programs, snow shoveling programs that we recruit volunteers for, homeowner programs so that, especially seniors who may have a leaking gutter or a leaking roof can stay in their homes and be able to pay for those kinds of improvements. The whole home repair bill that our new county executive championed when she was at the State House and that funding. How do we bring these things together? And I'm not sure that this audit will be able to see those again, just from previous experience, because the data isn't being captured. It was called for by the Gender Equity Commission, it really audits outside back in 2015 or something when we created it, that we capture intersectional data by department. And so if there's a way to add, a kind of more in-depth data processes with this audit, I'm all ears. So I'm supportive today, but I do want us to make sure that we're looking at the intersections of how we don't make cleanliness the enemy of equity. That was too aggressively stated, but yeah. If the chair will permit interrogatory.
Interrogatory.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I didn't know if like that. Still figuring out
That's
how
what
some
you-
of these
yeah,
things
yeah.
work.
So are we after.
So, I couldn't agree more. Really, the only, I'll be really brief in this. The only thing that I would say is certainly racism and inequity in over enforcing, but there's also major issues with equity in under enforcing, and the way that we enforce some of our code in some of our neighborhoods, some of our minority neighborhoods, makes many that live there, and I think it makes it easy to believe that we believe that these neighborhoods are allowed to look like this. And I don't think violations are the way that we solve these problems, but also there's a problem for me when we create the straw man argument of this is a way that we come down hard on this little old lady, when in reality what we're discovering in a lot of our neighborhoods is that this little old lady lives next to the property that is in violation, and she doesn't deserve that. So I worry about
Messages.
I worry about both the I worry about the over enforcement, but I really worry about the under enforcement in these neighborhoods as well.
All right, so I am supportive of the effects that are happening in your neighborhood. I do decry your use of it being a straw. What is happening in my district is being a straw man argument, so it is not.
Maybe not the best word.
It is not. But that, as we say, we have very opposite effects that should be of concern in both sets of neighborhoods. How do we work together to make sure that we're not creating harm in one place when benefiting the other, right? We want to reduce harm that we're doing in both places for the goals that we share, right? It's not a zero-sum game. We appreciate it. That's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kell-Smith.
Thank you. And I just want to say I hear what you're saying, Councilwoman, and what I think that we need to do is make sure, and I've been saying this since I've got here, or since we started some of our programs, is we need to, when people have a violation, we need to connect them to the opportunities that we have to fix up a home or to make repairs. When somebody's going to a magistrate, connect them to the Housing Opportunity Fund or any URA funding, and and I continually say, every area in the city of Pittsburgh needs investment and needs some attention. To say that we can only do certain things in some areas versus others, the bottom line is we represent all these neighborhoods. The mayor represents the entire city. And we have neighborhoods that need investment, whether they look like it or not. But I think it's connecting. In every neighborhood, we have somebody who's elderly, somebody who's poor, somebody who needs a little bit of help. And getting those people the help they need will help make everybody feel like their neighborhoods are invested in and feel like they're worth our attention. So I just think it's putting all those, and it's a monumental task. I can't imagine anybody being able to do all this work, but I think having somebody bring all the resources to people that are in courts. I said we should have somebody in the courts when there's hearings, giving that information, out to the courts, whether it's working with our magistrates or not. Whatever that answer is, that's for somebody, higher than me to determine how that happens. But I hope that we would really seriously consider bringing the resources to the people that need it the most.
Thank you. And I'll just say, to close out the discussion, unless there's any further discussion or we want second round, for those, although it's a smaller piece of the overall picture of violations, for those who might have missed the briefing on our anti-litter efforts yesterday, when the clerk does get the slide decks that were sent by the anti-litter team, really encourage you to look at that, because it was really fabulous information and work that's been done linking litter abatement to anti-violence work, linking it to showing the disparities between 311 calls and where the actual need is. There's a difference there. So really encourage you to take a look at those slide decks when they come to council members. Second round, anyone?
I just,
Councilman Charlin.
Just one last point there is that, to agree, Councilwoman, I was about to call you Council President, Councilwoman Kell-Smith's point, that's one of the reasons why we send someone to court for all of our court cases, is that it isn't just because we want to follow up on the bad actors. It's also because there's a lot of opportunity for us in that office to help out. And in that room, you know, where we can connect someone to a URA program or the Hilltop Alliance or Brashear Association, there's all walks of life that come through that courtroom. And yes, we are there to follow up and make sure that the magistrates know who are the bad actors, but probably even more often and more important is making sure that the people that need help know that we as City Council can be a resource for them.
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Second round, Councilwoman Warwick.
Yeah, thanks. I do also just sort of to Councilman Charlin's point, just with regard to the briefing yesterday, we did, one of the numbers that I found particularly compelling from the briefing yesterday, was on 311 calls. And so, for example, you know, we are, which is, I'd be very interested in an analysis of our processes as it comes to responding to 311 calls, as opposed to going out as a city and actually doing enforcement as a matter of course, right? Because the majority of 311 calls are coming from neighborhoods with the least amount of issue, right, when it comes to litter and trash, et cetera. And I do understand Councilwoman Gross's point when we're talking about building code violations, right, where you do have a speculator who sort of wants to go after a property. It seems like there should be a way for us to thread the needle between the two, right? Because when you do have neighborhoods where people just simply aren't calling, right? Like there's dumping going on at a property on the street and they're just not calling. So we're not seeing it and we're not getting out there and then pursuing the violation because that's a community that hasn't historically gotten much in the way of results from 311 calls, right? So there's a balance here, and yeah, hopefully this audit is something that can cover both sides of that. So, thanks.
Thank you, Councilwoman. With that, Council President Lavelle.
Thank you. Just one sort of point of clarity. Councilman Charlin, I do know you've been working with our controller and she's fully on board to do this. However, the resolution reads, resolution both authorizing and directing. City Council does not have the ability to direct the controller's office. We have the ability to authorize, should they be willing to do this in partnership with us, but we don't have the ability to actually direct them. And so for me, friendly amendment, remove the word direct as opposed to authorizing, given that she's already said on the front end, she's willing to work with you to perform this work.
Is there a motion?
So motion to strike the word directing.
And directed, maybe?
Motion to strike the word
And directing.
and directing.
Yes.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I apologize. I think
From the title and from the section.
we used existing language from a previous request to the controller here. So I see your point there. So yeah, I'm very supportive.
Thank you. All those in favor of the verbal amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Amendment passes. Thank you, Council President, for the clarification. Now we will take up the actual bill itself as amended, unless there's any further discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Bill is affirmative recommendation on the bill. Congratulations, Councilman Charlin, for an affirmative recommendation on your first piece of legislation.
Thank you.
That moves us to invoices. Is there a motion on invoices?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Invoices are approved. Interdepartmental transfers. Seeing no interdepartmental transfers or P cards, that moves us on to Land Use and Economic Development Committee, chaired by Councilman Wilson. And Bill 12.
Bill 12, Resolution amending Resolution 766 of 2023, entitled Resolution Further Amending Resolution 772 of 2023, effective January 1, 2017, as amended, entitled Resolution Adopting and Approving the 2017 Capital Budget and the 2017 Community Development Block Grant Program, approving the 2017 through 2022 Capital Improvement Program by reducing Lynn Williams High Rise by $2,500 and St. Ambrose Manor by $1,299.35, and increasing Pittsburgh Higher Ground Foundation, Inc. by $3,799.35, and authorizing subsequent agreements by adding the information for Pittsburgh Higher Ground Foundation, Inc. to Section 1, and by changing the JDE job number in Section 2.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 11.
Bill number 11, Resolution amending Resolution 614 of 2023, entitled Resolution Authorizing the Mayor and the Director of City Planning to enter into a professional services agreement and/or contracts with HR&A advisors for the purpose of assisting in the development of a strategic plan for the Department of City Planning at a cost not to exceed $109,000 over 1 year.
Motion to approve. Brief discussion.
Second.
Discussion? Councilman Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. We have Assistant Director Dash on the line, and I just wanted to ask if you could give a briefing for council, quick briefing on what this bill is doing.
Sure, thank you, Councilman. Andrew Dash, Deputy Director, Department of City Planning. This bill is really just changing one line of a resolution that City Council approved in September of last year. We received a grant from Heinz Endowments towards the development of a departmental strategic plan. And when that legislation was passed in September, there was an error in the Grants Trust Fund line, just the number, the JDE number. And so unfortunately, for us to be able to finalize a contract, with the law department, we need to correct that number via this resolution.
Great. Thank you for refreshing my memory, and looking to support it. Thanks.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? One abstention. Affirmative recommendation. Thank you, Assistant Director Dash. That brings us to Innovation, Performance, and Asset Management and Technology Committee, chaired by Councilwoman Gross.
Bill number 18, Resolution amending Resolution 156 of 2023, which provided for the mayor and the director of the Department of Public Works to enter into a professional services agreement or agreements with Route Smart Technologies, Inc., which provides trash and recycling routing optimization for the purchase and implementation of navigation software that will provide turn-by-turn directions to environmental service drivers by extending the term through December 31st, 2026, and by increasing the total amount by $24,680 for a total not to exceed amount of $174,420.
Motion to approve, brief discussion.
Second.
So I have to give the director credit because she tried to reach out repeatedly and we just didn't catch each other. And I think we're supposed to catch each other tomorrow. But this is just a $24,000 increase into the, we've discussed the route optimization for our fleet before. So I didn't have any questions, but if members do, I probably won't be able to answer them.
Councilman Conkel.
Just a quick question. Is this just around refuse? Is that right, for the vehicles, or is this across the board?
Environmental services.
Environmental services, all right. So it's GPS, I guess, upgrade of a GPS.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Refuse,
I mean,
snow.
this has been going back years, so there were times when our streets, and again, I'm just kind of extemporizing here. I was not briefed this week on it, but, that we'd had long-time employees who just kind of knew the routes. And as we lost those employees, and then we had new drivers, especially who needed to remember, we would get reports that, actually, that little cul-de-sac, never got their garbage picked up. And so having the actual, kind of just like all of us have GPS in our phones or wherever, telling drivers what routes to go on was very helpful.
Yeah, I don't know.
So I don't get a lot of complaints about missed garbage. So I always like to give Environmental Services a shout out for that. Thank you, Environmental Services, for being a really dependable department. It was a little bumpy there during the pandemic when we had people out sick, and we know that they work on a pretty lean team. So that had some negative impacts. But by and large, I always like to give them a shout out. So.
Yeah, I often wonder what we did before GPS and finding places, especially when you're out of town. But yeah, I was under the impression our GPS system covered all over Public Works, Environmental Services, but I'm guessing not now, seeing this.
Well, this one is for that, yes,
Public
those
Works
teams.
as well? Oh.
This is that, yes, that's what this does.
Okay, so it covers all vehicles.
I'll find out.
Yeah,
I don't think I understood your question exactly.
Yeah. I thought that it covered.
I thought you said DPW and Environmental Services, which this is, but I'm happy to ask.
Okay, yeah, it's fine. That's all.
Thank you. Councilwoman Kell-Smith.
So this is an extension of an existing contract for another year, and I don't understand why they just couldn't, so this wasn't rebid or anything. It was a.
No, I think it's, again, I'm making this up. I wasn't briefed specifically on this bill, but the last time, which was about a month ago, that we had to do an extension on a technology contract, I think, Councilwoman, you asked the same question, and I believe at the time my response was, you really can't just stop using a technology, and for the department...
Well, tell somebody who stopped Snowplow Tracker, but okay. We have stopped Snowplow Tracker. I haven't seen that. Have you?
So
Is it
when
running
we've
right now?
lost
Yeah, it's
internal,
down.
when we've lost the internal capacity to do a task without the technology,
I'm
it's
going to
a
vote no
tough
today,
transition.
Councilwoman. I'm going to vote no today because I think that people have enough time to know when their and that should be part of somebody's job in any department, to know when your contracts are up and start working on them in advance. I did this under every administration. I'm not going to change now. So, thank you.
Any further discussion? I'm supportive today. The one question I would love to find out between now and the final vote next week is, again, at the letter briefing yesterday, one of our environmental services employees said that he took a good couple of months out of his schedule to organize the environmental services waste pickup, the trash pickup. And that was a manual task, and I'm wondering how that relates to this technology and why a staffer has to take time out. So, happy to support today. I understand the need for this, but that would be my question to ask. Thank you. Second round, Councilwoman
I'll
Kinsman.
also say I'd like to really put the money towards a hokey man to go up, cleaning up after the trash is left behind. But I do think our environmental service people do an amazing job, but they can't get everything with all the different requirements that they have now and the way trash is, collected and bagged now. So, but I would say it would be great to see somebody else do something.
Thank you. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Opposed.
Abstain.
One abstention, one opposed. Affirmative recommendation. Thank you, and that moves us to Intergovernmental and Educational Affairs Committee, chaired by Councilman Mosley.
Bill number 6, resolution adopting plan revision to the City of Pittsburgh's official sewage facilities plan for 5203 Colombo Street at no cost to the city.
Motion to approve.
Thank you. Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Affirmative recommendation. Bill 7.
Bill number 7, resolution authorizing the mayor, the director of public works, and the director of finance on behalf of the City of Pittsburgh to enter into a permanent easement with the Pennsylvania American Water Company for the installation, maintenance, repair, operation, and removal of a water line on city-owned property.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion? All those in favor say aye.
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 Second. Opposed? Affirmative recommendation. That moves us to Bill 9.
Bill number 9, resolution authorizing a cooperation agreement or agreements providing for the transfer of funds not to exceed $12,622,642 to the City of Pittsburgh Equipment Leasing Authority for the purchase and leasing of vehicles, equipment, and accessories, equipment support infrastructure, and professional services for use by City of Pittsburgh departments.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion?
I'm sure I have something, but I missed.
Yeah.
Councilman
Well,
Hawkins.
being on the Equipment Leasing Authority Board, I believe, I know Director Pollock's here, but in case anybody's wondering, this is to lease vehicles. We started that 2 years ago. It's been very, very good because we don't have the necessary vehicles we need. So the leasing, we're not responsible for repairs. I think it works out pretty good. I don't know if we want to continue it for years and years, but I'm full support of it.
What are we leasing?
Vehicles, dump trucks, F-150s, heavy-duty pickup trucks, all for public works and/or parks, I believe. But mostly generated around public works. And this time of year, we always enter into this lease because of snow removal.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Affirmative recommendation. That brings us to meeting announcements. On Saturday, January 20th at 10 a.m., Council will hold a Cablecast post-agenda discussion on human trafficking. Chairing is Council Member Teresa Kale-Smith. Next week, Tuesday, January 23rd at 10 a.m., Council will hold its regular council meeting, and on Wednesday, January 24th at 10 a.m., the Standing Committees meeting will be held. Back to a regular week and a regular schedule next week. Speaker registration will close at 9 a.m. the day of the meeting.
Been a long time.
To register to speak at these meetings, please complete the sign-up form on the council meeting webpage. You may also call the clerk's office at 412-255-2138. Is there anything from members? Councilwoman Kale-Smith.
Thank you. I just want to say real quickly that the meeting on Saturday on the 20th was because it was at the request of the group, and that's when they could get the survivors. And they said it's the first time that they've had such a panel that they know of in this area to address of a panel of all survivors. So I think that it's really important to have them hear their voice and have some discussion. But I had to call for a post agenda to make sure that the employees could come in on a Saturday. So it's a post agenda type meeting, but we're mostly going to hear from other people. I just want, if members can come, great. If not, I think everybody would totally understand, so we can.
Thank you.
That's it.
Any further comment from members? Seeing none, can we have a motion to approve the minutes and adjourn the meeting?
Second.
Second.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
What time is that on Saturday?
10 a.m.